This is an app called Baseball Finishes, and the purpose of this entire video is to show you how you can use one or two parameters to filter a database. So you can kind of get another way of using a database inside of one of the lists. Now, I'm a big baseball fan, so I just kind of did this for fun. I just kind of enjoy it. And data, let me tell you something about baseball people. Baseball people are stats nuts. All of us are. We just really, we like watching the numbers. We like watching what the numbers mean in terms of our players and our favorite teams. So they have a baseball database in here. And it's not that deep, to be honest with you, but it works. And so, just so you know, this is a little over 2,500 lines long. So it's a deep database. It just isn't that broad. It gives you the year, how the team finished. That's their rank, usually one through. Depends on how deep the league is. Some years there were only five teams. Some years there were eight. How many home games they played, what their name is. That's a string. Where they played, also a string, and then the team ID, because in a lot of databases, the teams are referred to by these three letter string, not the actual team name. You have to know, like BLA always means Baltimore Orioles. I'm going to deal with rank just to show you baseball finishes and how they finish the year. And I did it a couple of different ways. I wanted to be able to check a team's first place finishes. So you go into here, and this is the list of all of these teams in this database. And I used Microsoft Excel to create that. And then I can go ahead and pick any team on this. I'm going to pick the Boston Red Sox, and that will show you all of the years that the Boston Red Sox finished in first place. I will pick my beloved Mets. You will see, unfortunately, that it is a much shorter list. So here's my Mets, and those are the years that the Mets finished in first place. And you'll also see that there are some teams on this database, like the Boston Bean Eaters, that never finished in first place. I actually wrote it so that you could see which teams never had a first place finish. I'll go back to home, and then I'm going to show you the one that uses two parameters. This will actually tell you any team in this database on any given year how many or what rank they finished. So I'll go ahead back to my Boston Red Sox, and I'll pick the Boston Red Sox for, let's pick 1921 and show me how they finished. And it runs my little query, and it tells me that in 21, the Boston Red Sox finished in fifth place. Totally normal. I'm going to go ahead and pick 1904 and see it again. And there's no record of that team for that year. And that's because Boston Red Sox didn't exist then. They didn't exist until later on that decade. So the Boston Red Sox did not exist in 1904. Now, what the heck did I do? How did I do that? Let's go back to my code, and I'm going to show you how it works. This is where I develop the lists. You know how to do that already, right? And then it's a little bit sloppy coding. I apologize. I write here and here. These are all the buckets I'm going to use where I have to create the blank lists as global variables. All this stuff here are event handlers for just bouncing around. This is all runs the nav buttons on the landing page and how to go back and forth between that. It's not a big deal. Now, this is where I actually run the functions. But before I show you the function calls here and here, there's the function calls. Let's look at the functions themselves, because that's what really is important here. This is the first place finishes function, okay? Right here, that's what this is running here. Turn that off so we can not have it bounce around so much. The first place function is looking for a parameter called team. I need to know what team I'm picked. As you obviously figured out, that's where I call it from this list right here. Whenever it senses a change, it's going to use that parameter team. The first thing I do is empty my list called filtered first place finishes. I'm going to actually put my list into a variable called filtered first place finishes. So it runs from 0, the first line of the database, for the entire length of the list, all 2,500 plus lines, and it checks to see whether this parameter team equals or is the same as the string team name. It's comparing two strings. I use a double equal. It compares the two strings. And then I use a double and, because it has to equal two things. It has to have the same team name, and it has to have a rank of number 1. So it goes through each line. And if the team name shows up, it says, ooh, now look over at rank. And if rank is number 1, append, add it to this list called filtered first place finishes. That's the list I just emptied. So I'm creating a brand new list called filtered first place finishes. It runs through all 25 lines of the database very quickly, less than probably 2 milliseconds. And then it actually sticks it in this list. Then I'm going to do this other thing that creates a nice output. So this is another important part of this function. I have a second variable inside of it called filtered first place finishes output list. I know that's a long name, but I wanted it to be meaningful. I'm creating the first place finishes in a neat set of rows. Because if you notice, when I printed, I'll go to Boston Braves. I think they had some first place finishes, right? You notice I have a line break here, and then a line break here, and then a line break here. This is how I do it. I go ahead and I say, okay, take this entire list and use this join command. It's available in here. You've got it here. It's called join. It's definitely available to you right in here. And the separator I use, it's asking for a separator. I use the \n. I wanted to put a line break between every line of this. And then, I mean, it's a little tricky to see here. I then go in here and I say, if the filtered, well, actually, I go ahead and create the list called the team, and then team, whatever parameter I'm passing in, whatever I select here, finished in first place, and then you're going to see it won't quite show it here. First place on, and then I go ahead and I put out this output list at the end of this. Let me show you in text. It's just a little easier to see because I can scroll in text a little bit better. So I say set text first place finishes output, the team, whatever parameter I sent in, finished in first place in the following years, put in a line break, that's this line break right here, and then filtered first place finishes output list, which also has its line breaks. And that gives me a nice, pretty output right there. So I'm going to go back to blocks to show you how that works. Now, the last thing I do is what happens if I pick a team that never finished in first place, like the Boston Beaneaters. The Boston Beaneaters have had a long history, but when they were the Boston Beaneaters, they never had a first place finish. So what happens is when I create this filtered first place finishes list, right? If they never had a first place finish, this list will be empty. It will still stick this list into here, but I check it here and I say if the filtered first place finishes list length is 0. In other words, if this list is now empty, give me a different result. The team never finished in first place. The team name, the Boston Beaneaters, never finished in first place. I think the Brooklyn Superbas, also never finished in first place. But when I go ahead and do the Chicago White Sox, the Chicago White Sox had some first place finishes. So they get an answer. That's how that splits it out. Now, how do I call this? It's really important. When I call it, what happens is first place team drop down. So I'm right in here. This right here, when it senses a change, I create a variable called choice. I take the first place, whatever I choose here, get text first place, and I drop it in a variable called choice. And then when I call my first place function, first place, it's calling for a team function. I say, when it's looking for the team, give it whatever's in this variable. So I take Chicago White Sox and I stick it in the variable called choice. I pass it in as the parameter, which then gets dropped in here, and I run the filter. That's how that works. That's with a single parameter. Now I'm going to show you how to do it with 2 parameters. It's the same thing, just do it twice. Watch this show. I go over here to team finished on a given year. I am looking at a function that's looking for a team. Guess what? It's this list and a year. I go in here and I'm going to pick the Atlanta Braves from 1940. And there's no record of that team for that year. Probably not my best choice. I probably should have picked 2005. I'm going to do that. In 2005, the Atlanta Braves finished in first place. They had a really good year that year, actually. And so they said really good pitching. Anyway, back to the story. Now, what happens when I run this function is I'm going to need how finish, return is, record, and rank. I'm going to need all of this, right? And what I'm going to need is I'm going to need to empty these lists. I'm going to run this function. I click show me how they finished. It's going to go through the entire list. And if, first of all, I look for the year that's been passed in, and the team name. So you have to match both. And then I fill my rank finish variable with whatever the rank says. I establish the bucket way up here, rank finish, right? Now I clear rank finish, and then I fill rank finish with whatever the rank actually is. Actually turn on this thing called isRecord, and I turn it on. I have a Boolean here that says if it is a record, I make it say true, okay? That'll be important in a minute. And then I say how finish return. So now I'm kind of creating that output concatenation. In the year, whatever year I chose, the team name, blah, 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 finished in whatever place. I'll show you that in text because sometimes it's easier to see in text. How finish return is now in the year, whatever year I chose, the whatever team I chose, finished at whatever rank I chose. Okay. So I pass in all three variables that I picked: the year I picked, the team I picked, and the rank. And I stick it in here, how finish return. But here's the thing. What if I pick a year where the team didn't exist? For example, the Boston Beaneaters. The Boston Beaneaters did not exist in 2005. They disbanded after the 1907 season. So I click how they finished. There is no record of the team that year. How did I accomplish that? I accomplished that with an if else. Remember this whole is record is true is set to true? If there's a match, the record is set to true. This looks at that. It looks at the is record variable. And if the is record variable doesn't say true, then it actually sets the text to say there is no record of that team for that year. So if I pick a team that doesn't have a record for that year, I get a failure message to my user so they know that, oh, I picked a year that the Boston Beaneaters didn't exist. How can I test that? I know the Boston Beaneaters existed in 1905. So I'm going to go way back here to 1905, and I'm going to pick it. The Boston Beaneaters existed in 1905. They existed in 1907. Oh, sorry, 1907 was the year they disbanded. I'm sorry, they disbanded after the 1906 season. I misspoke. There we go. 1906, they finished in last place. They actually decided to move out to Milwaukee at that point. So that's how, and eventually, by the way, they became the Atlanta Braves. But that's the point. Now, this is my failure record. So in all, this gets called because when I go up to here, this is the call is a little bit more complicated right here. So for how they finish on the event, when I click a change, the moment I make a selection, the moment I pull that, you'll see right now, I'll pull that particular command real short right here. Watch this. Baltimore Orioles. You'll notice it ran that code. It took Baltimore Orioles and threw Baltimore Orioles and team finish, right? Then I'm going to pick a different team, 1917, for example. And you notice that it ran this. Then it says, show me how they finished. I'm going to speed this up because it's going to run through 2,500 lines of text of a database. And the Baltimore Orioles in 1917, there's no record of that team for that year because the Orioles did not exist that year. When I go to 28, go to something much more current, like 44, 58. There we go. The Baltimore Orioles existed in the early part of the 20th century. They disbanded and became other teams for a while. And then eventually they restarted a Baltimore Orioles team. And that's why you see them like in the early days. I think they have finishes in like 1901. So there's a 1901 finish. But then in the middle of the century, they didn't exist. So there's a failure message. And then by the 50s and 60s and 70s, they existed again. And that's why you see them come back. So this is how I filter two functions. I have the function called team finish and the function called year finish. And when I fire this button, it fires the two parameters I need. Team finish gets put in for team, year finish gets put in for year. So when it runs the filter, it gets the team from team finish, it gets the year from year finish, runs my filter, and gives me the output that I want. I hope that helps. Thanks for watching.